Dette Trond Vatne Tveiten, og du hører på JointPod, podcast nummer 7. Ja, nå har vi takket med stort sett det som aktivister og cannabispasienter i Skandinavia, og for å kanskje bringe oppmerksomheten litt andre steder, så pass på at politiet ikke så mye etter oss, så skal vi nå intervjue en politimann. Dette Neil Woods, lederen for Leap. Good day, Leo. Nice to have you on.
Hello. Good to speak to you. I haven't spoken to you for a while.
Yeah, it's a long time since you were in Norway 3 years ago, and thanks for that, we now have a Leap in Norway.
Yeah, and some wonderful members there are too. Borde in particular is a fantastic spokesperson.
For the people who didn't hear the last podcast, we did 3 or 4 years ago, I think, but damn, time flies. Tell me a little about Leap to the listeners.
Well, I'm on the board for Leap in the USA, and Leap is the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. We are a growing international movement of police and other law enforcement figures who campaign for an evidence-based drug policy. And the advantage, I think, that we bring to the drug law reform debate is that people listen to us because we've been there. You know, we're the people who've been given this bloody awful job of fighting this war on drugs, and you know, we're here to tell the public that it's a disaster. It's causing massive harm to individuals and society and corrupting entire nations. So that's what we do, and we found ourselves duty bound to do so. Really, a lot of us, because of the harm that we've caused when we were still police. And in fact, in Norway, we have lots of serving police who are members.
Because the first time I talked with you, we had no Leap in Norway, Scandinavia, and very few police officers who dared to talk to me, even. We had like maybe 2. But now that's changed, haven't it?
Yeah, well, that's what we do. We bring the debate mainstream. We make it mainstream, and also we give courage to those police who've been considering reform, drug policy reform. And it gives them, the strength to speak out because they know that they're not alone. They know that they are part of a growing international movement.
We're going to talk about Leap because we have to also talk about your books. You had a very good book, Good Cop, Bad War. This was about your life, 14 years, infiltrating drug gangs and undercover. Talk me a little bit about that book for people who haven't read it all. Yeah, read it yet.
Well, Good Cop, Bad War, it's, as you say, it's a memoir, and it covers various times of me working undercover. When I went into working undercover, when I went into the police, I had a very judgmental view of people who used drugs problematically. I just saw people as having made a stupid mistake and not having the willpower to get out of that. I didn't understand trauma. I didn't understand the trauma causes of addiction, and I didn't have much sympathy for people. But in order to be successful as an undercover cop, I had to learn about people. I had to empathise and understand about people's lives, and it was that sort of gradual learning about people that I was spending time manipulating that actually eventually, helped change my mind. Would you like me to tell you about one of the operations from?
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
One operation I did. I'd actually given up undercover work for a few weeks at this point because I was finding it too emotionally taxing. One of the people I had manipulated on an operation ended up being suicidal. Actually, when he was in the police cells, he had to be watched every minute to stop him committing suicide, and that was the impact that I had on him. So I was finding it emotionally taxing, but the detective sergeant who arranged these operations contacted me and said, "Look, Woodsy, we need you to do this next job because these gangsters are even worse than the last. They're using gang rape as part of their intimidation, as part of their way of controlling the community. And they were doing the normal kind of gangster stuff like kidnappings and maimings and shootings and that kind of thing, but they were also using sexual violence. So I went to this and the gang is a very infamous gang called the Burger Bar Boys, who operated out of Birmingham. So I went to Northampton and I manipulated some problematic heroin users into introducing me to the inner circle, and eventually I got close enough to the 6 main gangsters that I could buy drugs off them. And they were genuinely terrifying people. One of them was implicated in 7 different murders in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And one day they actually snatched me off the street, put me in the back of this people carrier, this van, and took me to this secluded place. And they said, "You're drug squad. You're 5-0. You're heat, man. Strip." And so they made me strip, and they showed me a gun to make sure that I was under no doubt that I had to do as I was told. And so, it was a scary job, that one. There was so many times I thought I was going to get killed. But eventually, after 7 months of work, I gathered evidence against the 6 main gangsters and 90 other people. So there's evidence against 96 people who were going to be arrested. There was staff from 5 different police forces brought in to because it was such a huge operation. And at the end of that operation, I knew there was no one else to meet. I'd got all the phone numbers. I'd met everybody involved, and so I was quite confident that on this operation, we were going to completely shut down the whole scene, the whole drug dealing scene. So after the dust had settled, the officer in charge of intelligence spoke to me. He said, "Yeah, we managed to interrupt the drug supply in Northampton for a full 2 hours."
2 hours? And how much money did you spend on the operation?
Well, 7 months of work, huge support network around me, police from 5 different counties. I thought I was going to die on at least 2 occasions, all for the sake of interrupting the supply for 2 hours. Now,
2 hours.
If you're a problematic heroin user, that's not even enough time to withdraw from heroin. You'd need at least 4 hours for that.
I would say all the money you used on that, how many places you can, hospital places you can use to treat those people. How much you can use for social work and so on. Because this is part about millions of pounds, it isn't. Yeah,
exactly. It's a huge amount of money. It's policing drugs is the biggest. It's the most expensive part of a police budget. There is absolute fortunes being spent on this, and clearly for no benefit at all. Now, I can't say with any certainty that it was the Burger Bar Boys' infamous rivals, the Johnson crew, who took up that opportunity. But you can sort of picture the scene, can't you? The rival gang are all sat around sharing a spliff or a bong, and one of them gets a phone call, and he's jumping up and down, celebrating, saying, "Put the call in, we're going to make a fortune. Look what the police have done for us." And that's the reality of police activity like this, is that it just creates opportunities for rivals. That's all it does. And, it took a long time for me to understand. It took a long time, really. I was a bit slow on the uptake, but, once you see it clearly, it's not even that complicated, is it? It's not complicated. The police are really, really good at catching drug dealers. We are really good at it.
Yeah.
If you give the police twice the resources, if you give them twice as much money, they'll catch twice as many. But it still doesn't make any difference, because the police never reduce the size of the market. Never. But police do change the shape of that market, and that changing shape is worse each year. It gets gradually worse. It gets more violent. It gets more monopolised. It causes more corruption with every passing year.
One thing, I've been working in social work, and I also been a security guard for many years. So what I observe is also who they arrest for drug use. Because I can pick out the people on the streets who can, danger of getting caught by drug use. But I also see a lot of other people who use the drugs who never get caught at all. I was smoking cannabis and so on in the 90s when I lived in my hometown. I was never caught because my family was up the ladder. But people who are down on the ladder, they always get caught. Isn't it like social? Yeah. I don't know what you think about that, but that was my observation. Is there some truth about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's a massive social inequality in the way that drug laws are enforced, and it's a basic truth that economically deprived people are more heavily policed in any regard. But of course, the easiest laws to catch people and criminalise people with are drug laws. And as you say, people who have wealth or a middle class background, that they don't get caught. They don't get caught. But people who are already marginalised and struggling, they do. And you're not the most ethnically diverse nation in Norway, are you? But places like the UK, this plays out most horrifically for people who are not white. So in the UK, if you're black, you're 9 times more likely to be stop searched for drugs than a white person. 9 times more. And black people don't use drugs more than white people.
No, they just use different kind of drugs.
Well, it's actually fairly even, to be honest.
Okay.
It's actually it's fairly equal. And then if arrested, a black person is more likely to go to court and then more likely to get sent to prison and more likely to get a longer prison sentence than a white person would. So, all of these multipliers mean that there is a massive racial disparity in the drug laws. But of course, our drug laws were always based on racism. It's in the DNA of them.
Yeah, we could go back to the history a bit there, because I discussed that with the police officers in Norway, and they say there's nothing to do with racism and so on. But there's 2 things I often hear, like when you're talking about drugs, those damn hippies, who's like the biggest argument they got, and culture. But the drug laws was started in the first place because of racism, because, if I'm not mistaken, because marijuana was used and cannabis was used as medicine before. Cocaine also was used. Yeah, even books about it and songs about it. But those drug laws come much later. Why?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, drug laws, our international drug laws are essentially United States domestic racism exported around the world through aggressive foreign policy. The whole world is suffering the hangover over American domestic racism. So, as you say, cocaine wasn't seen to be a problem until Southern black people were seen to be using it, and it was a way of attacking and controlling them after the with the Jim Crow laws and the racial segregation. Opiates weren't seen as a problem until Chinese immigrants were seen to be taking white jobs. Cannabis wasn't seen to be a problem until the Great Depression, when Mexicans were seen to be stealing white jobs. Even alcohol prohibition was about prejudice. Okay. It was the Protestant puritanical political base being very suspicious of immigrants from Italy and Ireland, where those Catholic populations were seen to be the people who used alcohol. And so alcohol prohibition, was a way of persecuting Catholics. And that's, the biggest supporters of alcohol prohibition was the Ku Klux Klan. And if you look at some of the publications and drawings that they did, it was clear what their intention was. It was about getting rid of Catholics.
Wow. But the prohibition didn't work at all, because we also had it in Norway, and the prohibition, there were no Catholics in Norway at that time. So how would you say the result of prohibition was when they did that on alcohol?
Well, the prohibition of drugs, and very much so alcohol, is what gave birth to organised crime. That's how organised crime started. It did not exist before. And it is what maintains and make organised crime now. It's what makes organised crime powerful. And international organised crime is corrupting entire nation states. If you look at West Africa, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, they are now narco states as a result of trying to control drugs through prohibition. Now, I remember speaking to. I did a debate in the Parliament in Denmark, in Copenhagen, against some senior police. And I started talking about the corruption and the inevitability of corruption. And And he rather disdainfully said to me, "Well, yeah, but we're not as corrupt here as you are in the UK." And that arrogance, I've really picked up on right across Scandinavia. To be honest, I've had the same thing in Finland and in Norway.
Yeah, I definitely know it.
That this is a UK problem, this corruption, or it's other countries. But each Scandinavian country has since then had its own scandal of senior drug squad officers found to be part of or dealing with organised crime groups. The corruption as a result of prohibition is inevitable, and you cannot defend against it. The only way we can stop this corruption is by regulating the drug markets.
But the police in Norway says, because police in Norway have huge respect. When the police says something, people listen. Like they send the police to schools, and when they say something, people just listen without questions at all because they know everything.
Yeah, that's a problem, because particularly in your region, the police speak out on drugs where they really have got no right to be doing so. We've stopped. Police here have sort of stopped doing that. There's a ban on police going into schools talking about drugs now. It's
a ban in Norway. Yeah. They have the Norwegian, they call drug police organization, who goes to schools, have big meetings in town halls and so on, and they have no debate because they're not allowed to ask critical questions about them. You don't have that element. Is that just a Scandinavian thing?
Well, it used to be a British thing as well, but we do not send police into schools to talk about drugs anymore. That is absolute police policy, because it has been realised that this is dangerous, because police are not qualified ever to talk about something which is a health issue. They're not qualified, and the information that police are giving is actually counterproductive, because it's counter to harm reduction advice and is therefore a huge risk to young people. So police should go nowhere near schools on this topic.
You know where they go to schools and said, if you don't behave like this, you're never going to get a driver's license. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. And people say, since the police, they use the argument, since the police see all the tragedy, they had the right to say that.
Yeah, they don't, because there's no foundation in evidence to the kind of things that police say to children in schools about drugs, and that's a truth everywhere. So it just really shouldn't be happening. And I was certainly, next time I am in Norway, and I hope that's not too long, I would certainly love to speak to a journalist and get that out as a headline that this should not be happening.
You have been in Bergen. For people who haven't seen it, we have the video. I'm going to put that in the description under when he was in Bergen. It helped, and it was good. But a lot of the new drug laws come during Nixon. And Nixon also said, usually, he didn't like hippies and so on. Because I had the observation when I was working out. The good clubs in the town, when I work, people were using cocaine and so on, the police was never there. But there was a little more alternative club where people used reggae and so on, and police was always there. You have to explain that, because I think it was hilarious.
Yeah, it's cultural bias, isn't it? It's a huge misunderstanding, and it's about othering people. It's about prejudice. But if you bring in a prohibitive law about other people's behaviour, then that invites judgment, doesn't it? It invites prejudice. And it creates a mechanism for bias within policing, and that shouldn't be happening.
But it is a problem. And I'm going to go further on CBD oil, because cannabis in treatment has also been a big political issue, because as I said, France and Italy want to classify those medics as drugs, while the European Union says the otherwise. Why do you think that happens? Why do you think France and Italy are so hard even on oil based on cannabis, who's not dangerous and not drug at all?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, the political divide in this kind of discussion across Europe is interesting and difficult to figure out. I'm actually giving evidence to a select committee for the French government next week, alongside a couple of other people from the UK, but I'm representing LEAP. And so that the French government is actually considering this and reviewing it. So I'm hoping there will be a change in their position after next week, because I will be providing evidence on the feasibility of not just medical cannabis, but also for a regulated market for adult use. So, there are political discussions, and it's ebbs and flows all the time. But I mean, the difference generally between jurisdictions in the European Union is down to the political reality of what party, of where one political party sees as their voter base, and where their voter base exists. So, party politics is always the stumbling block for drug law reform, and that's why it's always worth remembering for anyone listening to this who is involved or wants to be involved in reform. Any social justice issue doesn't change through political leadership.
Mm.
It changes through social movement. And that's the case for any social justice issue, whether it's votes for women, whether it's the end of the death penalty, whether it's the illegality of homosexuality, equal pay for genders, whatever the social justice issue, change always comes through social movement. And that means that it's the responsibility of each one of us to keep that social movement growing. And politics will follow, I mean, I spend a lot of time speaking to a lot of politicians, don't get me wrong, but the most important people out there are the voting public, and that's where the movement is growing.
We're going to talk about science, because there's a lot about science about this. But people who says the wrong things in science also get fired. We have the example with David Nutt in Britain, who was fired even he said he had the science with him. Is this like a debate where you don't even listen to the people? The one party who's for prohibition always get wrong. We don't want to listen to the evidence. That's what I'm trying.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean that's the great disconnect, the great confusing thing about drug policy, isn't it? I mean, our drug laws are not based on evidence at all. They're based on ideology, and that's the problem. And it's ideological fervour, ideological enthusiasm, which has kept our drug laws in place. Also, of course, the propaganda that newspapers put out, propaganda that police put out, claiming that they're having success when actually they never do. But there's a start. There's the beginnings of listening to evidence. But I should point out, David Nutt, he's a friend of mine, and obviously he's a great fellow activist and a hero of our cause. But bear in mind that if he hadn't been sacked and if he hadn't had all that huge amount of publicity, then the social movement wouldn't have grown the same, because he has become such an important focal point for the movement, not just in the UK but around the world. And that's happened really, because he was sacked, because he is able to publicly use that narrative that politicians are not listening to the evidence. And a lot of people have been won over to reform, to the reform movement, because of his situation and how he very cleverly made the most of that situation by setting up his organisation, Drug Science, including many of his colleagues, for his networking in academia. He's doing an amazing job, which he just wouldn't have been able to do if he hadn't been sacked.
But one of the arguments is also from, because in Norway we had those parent organizations too. It says, like, if you said legalization, you also said you have no empathy for people who die of drugs. That's the main argument they always use, and it always seems to work. Social Democrats are using it, Christian Democrats are using it. What do you have to say to that?
Well, it's a rather twisted way of looking at it, isn't it? I mean, if they've really got empathy for people who die from drug overdoses, then they would want to use an evidence-based policy to save lives. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's morally twisted to actually use that line, because evidence clearly shows that if you treat drugs as a health issue rather than a criminal one, less people die. Yeah. You only have to look at the example of Portugal for that. They had the highest drug deaths in Europe, and now they've got almost the lowest, and they managed that over only a 20-year period. Well, actually, that they did it within 5 or 6 years. They'd made that much of a difference. But it's 20 years ago since they decriminalised, and they have a fraction of the drug deaths of anywhere in Scandinavia or the UK or actually the rest of Europe. Theirs is a huge success story with very clear evidence. So it's morally indefensible for the Social Democrats or Christian Democrats to use that as an argument.
Yeah, but how do you want to regulate drugs? That is, people always say, like, how much people do you want? Because that is the big issue here. Do you want to sell in the shops? Because I see regulate models they have from the United States where you can nearly buy candy with cannabis. And I'm a little bit skeptic towards that. But how do you want to regulate it?
Well, I mean, you have to break it down into individual policy decisions. And so each drug has different regulatory requirements.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more risky drugs need a stricter regulatory regime. And those that are less risky need less controls. But I mean, cannabis, for example. I mean, cannabis will be the most likely first drug to be regulated in your region, same as the UK. And I agree with you. I'm not very fond of the laissez-faire, purely capitalist way of doing it that some American states have done. I would want to have a policy emphasis on public health. So I would ban advertising. I would not allow branding. I would have clear regulated doses, amounts of THC clearly labelled. And the most important thing, of course, is that this is a child protection issue. Our children in any European country or any country around the world can get hold of cannabis easier than they can alcohol.
They can.
So this is about protecting children. And the best way to do that is to have a requirement for photographic ID to make sure that underage people don't buy it. And, the evidence is very clear from the United States and Canada and Uruguay, where they have regulated, that underage consumption has gone down. It's a success story.
Yeah, let's talk about Canada, because there have been mixed reports here in Norway in the media. Some claim that they make it worse. Some also claim that they haven't got rid of the gangs like they said they would. But you know more about Canada than me, so let's talk.
Well, I mean, basically, Canada in some ways is a disappointment. You're right, it is actually in some ways a disappointment because they have only reduced their illicit market by 50%.
Yeah.
But that's 50% less money going into the hands of organised crime than before. So it's still better than it was before. And even though they've only reduced the illicit market by 50%, they've still had a drop in underage child consumption. So that's still a success story as well. But having said that, they could do better. And the mistakes they've made, I'm glad they made the mistakes, because we as countries who haven't yet done it, can learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
And there's interest. It's interesting, actually. I spoke at the Labour Party conference in 2019, and there's a Labour politician who is now the shadow spokesperson for justice, an MP called David Lammy. And at that conference, he made the point that when the UK does regulate cannabis, the tax department should stay completely away from it, not tax it at all, so that the price can be kept low enough to completely undermine the whole of the illicit market. He said, because that's the main objective here. The objective is not to make money, it's to make the whole thing safer. So that was an interesting point from someone who is now in the senior part of the Labour Party. And I agree, because one of the mistakes Canada's made is that it's almost twice the price of the street price of cannabis. And twice the price. It's a wonder that they have got rid of even half the market. And also, they've made the mistake of giving the licenses to too few large corporations who have not paid enough attention to the fact that people like quality products.
No.
So the quality available in the shops has not been as good as some connoisseurs would expect, within the illicit market. So we can learn from this, can't we? We can see where they've gone wrong. We can make things better. But what I do say, it's important to note that Canada is in the process of sorting these problems out, and you can only change things once you've taken control with a regulated market.
You just look at Paraguay. I'm not sure how it went there. Do you have some reports for that?
In Uruguay,
Uruguay. Sorry.
Yeah, Uruguay have an incredible success story. Their illicit market has virtually gone completely. Completely. So the organised crime involvement with cannabis has disappeared. And the way that they did that is that the government fixed the price at $1 a gram.
Oh.
And that is cheaper, significantly cheaper than the illicit market price. It means that it's not viable for criminals to be involved.
Yeah.
So that's a success story.
Now they're going to start it in Mexico, but there are forces there who try to stop it. Well, we all know why they try to stop it, but do you know anything how they're going to organize it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no immediate plans. I haven't seen any immediate plans for a regulated market, but they are moving to decriminalize at the moment. The problem is with Mexico is there was a politician who called for regulated drug markets, and he was set up because the cartels do not want their business taken away from them, and the corruption is so complete in Mexico that the cartels have the most power. They have more power than any theoretically elected government. So, you could take the rather depressing view that it's too late for Mexico to take control away from the cartels, and it can't be done. So, but that means that it's the responsibility of every other nation to take this on and beat organised crime in their own countries, for the sake of places like Mexico, where there were 17,000 murders or disappearances just last year in Mexico. 17,000. This drug war is killing people right across the globe.
Wow. But if America changed, wouldn't that also have an effect on Mexico? Because a lot of the drugs goes over the border.
Yeah, I mean, America is the most important market for Mexico, of course. And there is evidence that the increasing amounts of regulated cannabis markets in the USA is actually taking away profits from the cartels. But of course, there's a long way to go, because there is more profit in the other drugs for the cartels than cannabis, because some cannabis can be homegrown. So there's a long way to go, and to remove the wealth from cartels there. Mexico are producing their own heroin. Not up to the quality of Afghanistan, but they do produce it. And Mexico is an important transit country for even for Europe as a transit country for the cocaine trade.
We can talk about a little bit of America, because it has been legal in America on the state level, but not on a federal level. We had heard a vice president is now talking about also making it legal federal on the whole country. How do you think that's going to go? I think it's going to, because there's a lot of interest groups in the United States, because putting people in prison is like a way of doing business. Do you think it's going to be illegal on federal level in the United States?
Oh, yeah, I've got no doubt at all. I mean, it was one of Joe Biden's principal campaign pledges that he would, as soon as he was elected, he would make it legal on a federal level. That's been well documented, and he's said it repeatedly. And the important part of that, in terms of the kind of growing cannabis businesses in America, is that those businesses have struggled because it's not been legal for them to use banks for their businesses. So there's all sorts of crime problems with cash transits from cannabis businesses. So the legalization on the federal level is going to be a big deal for the USA. And when it does reach that level, it's also going to be of a huge impact around the world as well. It will influence the way different governments see this issue. And I think it will prompt much further movement in Europe as well.
One of those arguments against, because it's the UN's it's the UN who can stop legalization. That's an argument to use in this country. But now the UN has sorry, my English is not always very good, but they put cannabis away from that list. Am I mistaken now?
Well, what the UN has done on the recommendation of the World Health Organization is all they've done is change the scheduling so that it's not considered as dangerous as it was. Now, lots of drug policy reformers have been celebrating this. It only happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Lots of people have been celebrating this, but I don't find something to celebrate about this. I think it's a total diversion. It's something that's I don't think we should be celebrating it, the UN doing this, because to do so just invests more power in the UN. And what we need to be doing is ignoring the UN and innovating with regulation in our own backyard. So, I mean, the farcical nature of that decision that they made such a big deal about is the fact that it's over 2 years since Canada legally regulated it for the whole country.
Yeah.
And that's completely in breach of the United Nations Single Convention. So, the convention's broken already. So for the UN to actually claim that they've still got some control over it is it's a distraction. We shouldn't be celebrating this. It's ridiculous.
But you have Brexit now. How will that affect it? Because it's a little bit chaos.
Oh, I don't.
I'm sorry. I just had to bring up the Brexit.
I know, but look, I consider myself European first and British second. If I could get Norwegian citizenship, I'd be moving out of
you are very welcome, my friend.
I'm a little weary of xenophobic nationalist politics. It wears me down, and it does a lot of us. But I don't know what impact it's going to have on drug policy. I mean, it's certainly a distraction at the moment, which means that it's very difficult for us to find the oxygen to talk about drug policy. It's difficult to find space in the media and with journalists because they're constantly talking about Brexit, if they're not talking about the pandemic, of course. So It's a difficult time at the moment for drug policy reformers. It really is. But it's difficult for us to find the space to get movement on this. But in terms of our domestic politics, we do have some light at the end of the tunnel in that we have, both within the Conservatives and the Labour, we have drug policy reform groups, which are growing with each of those parties. We also have strong support from Plaid Cymru, which is the Welsh Nationalists, and the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, and the Scottish National Party as well. So we have good allies and growing support within each of those parties. So, it's only going in one direction, but how fast that movement will come, I don't know, because at the moment we have the worst Home Secretary probably in our history, actually, on this topic. So although things are getting better, we still have a government which is quite difficult for this topic.
We have reform work in Norway, but we also have ability to get medicine, cannabis, if you travel abroad. And I have to tell you a little story here, because this is a story I confronted a lot of activists in Norway. During the pandemic, when it started, the police and the customs said of the rumor that Norwegian patients was going to the Netherlands just to get medicine they can sell on the streets. What happened then was that a lot of Dutch doctors stopped prescribing cannabis to Norwegian patients. What do you have to say about that? Because I think that's a very cynical way of doing things, because the cannabis patients that I know, it would not be a lot of money then to earn because the legalization, the process of getting medicine in Norway is so difficult anyway, and they use so much money on it to get there and back and forth anyway. What do you have to say when police and custom act like this?
Well, it's misinformation, though, isn't it? It's a way of intimidating the general population, and it's also a way of sort of giving the impression that what they're doing is successful, which is an absolute nonsense, because the broader cannabis supply and the broader drug supply in your region is controlled by Swedish organised crime gangs.
Yeah.
And those organised crime gangs based in Sweden are some of the most powerful and violent in the whole of the continent. And to they're not talking about that, are they? They're not talking about the reality that these markets are being controlled by extreme violence and even improvised explosive devices. This is what people should be talking about, not people struggling to get medicine and struggling just to feel well. It's they're choosing narratives which give the wrong impression of the reality of the situation.
Because that's a problem. We have a reform now because, I don't know if you heard, but we have an election this year. And that's why I'm making these specials again and again, because these specials I now make is going to go on during the election. We have a drug reform. I maybe think you heard about it. No? Yeah. We have a reform going on in the country, but it can be stopped. So what you have to say...
Sorry, I interrupted you there. So you mean your decriminalisation policy, which is, isn't it going through your parliament in a few weeks?
Yeah, but it can be stopped.
It can be. So there was broad support, but from the way I followed it, some of that support has fallen away a little. So it's not certain that it's going to go through, is it?
No, because like Norway has nothing learned that they thought like, well, Britain fucked up with Boris Johnson, United States fucked up with Trump, so we may put people from the former party as prime minister in Norway, and that party is going to try to stop the reform.
Right, and when's the election?
It's in September, so that's why I'm making this special so you can educate people and so on.
Yeah,
but we're going to talk. You've written 2 books. Good Cop, Bad War is the first one, and Drug Wars is the real inside of the story of Britain drug war is the second one. A little about the second book, because we all know the first book, but the second book.
Yeah, well, the second book is essentially, it's a history of British drug policy, but it's relevant anywhere in the world, because Britain's recent history, well, the last 60 years or so,
yeah,
is very relevant to any nation, because it's the one place on earth where you can see a comparison between American-style prohibition and a more health-based approach. So specifically in relation to heroin, this is really useful to look at, because the British system, the British way of doing things, right from the 1920s, was that if you had a problem with heroin, or cocaine for that matter, you would go to the doctor and the doctor would prescribe that drug to you. And as a result of that, we didn't have a drug problem. We didn't have one at all. So when America was lobbying the UK to follow that, to follow their way of doing things and treat drug use as a moral failing, there was lots of political resistance here, and we resisted for decades. But there's an interesting comparison that can be made. So during the 30s, 40s, 1950s and 60s, the UK measured up our problematic heroin users in the hundreds. That's all. For a nation of 65 million people we are now. It was 50 million people, say, in the 1950s. And in the USA, they measured their problematic heroin users in the hundreds of thousands. And the difference is the policy. So up until the end of the 1960s, that's what we did. American pressure forced us to follow their way of doing things. And at the moment that our system ended, at the moment the British system ended, there was only 1,046 heroin consumers in the UK. And the number was falling. 20 years later, there were 300,000. And we
300,000.
There's a very basic cause and effect there. And the records are very clear and made clear in the book that, and all of the crime, the power of organised crime that went with that, the disaster, the social disaster was all caused by that change in policy and following the American way of doing things. And so the book explores that, but it also explores the impact on society. So we interview various people and through the book and how it impacted various things. Like there's a funny chapter on the dance music culture, the rave scene. But also one of the concluding chapters is of a former police officer, a colleague and friend of mine called Frank Matthews, who was a whistleblower in the Metropolitan Police in London on corruption. And bearing in mind he'd investigated organised crime all of his career and dealt with all sorts of gangsters, but only when he was whistleblowing on the police did he find his life at risk.
Wow.
And he had to go into witness protection to protect him from the corrupt police. And it's an incredible story that he tells and that features in that chapter. It's just incredible what he went through, and the sheer level of corruption is astonishing. And it makes it clear that you can't fight this corruption as long as organised crime are in control of drugs.
You can buy. I'm gonna plug it because you can buy it in Norway at adlibris.no. You can, all people buy it. I'm gonna put the link in the description where you can buy it in Norway, so everybody can get it. So, but one of these books also gonna be filmed. You told me in a conversation a while ago.
Yeah, we're in discussion at the moment with the BBC.
Yeah.
Who have commissioned a first episode script for Good Cop Bad War.
Wow.
So they've paid for the first episode script, but the reason they do that is so that they can look at the script, look at the plan for the series, and then decide finally if they're going to give it the green light and make a drama. So, they've already invested something in it, and we're hoping to get the green light very soon. But of course, the trouble is at the moment is that the pandemic is slowing everything down. Yeah. And also, there's everything has to be, every organisation is making cuts. There's not as much money. So decisions like this are being delayed. But we've got this far, and we're optimistic still that it will get made eventually into a drama. And of course, if the BBC is our biggest TV station here in the UK, and they produce stuff that gets seen all over the world. So it will be a big boost for the movement, I think, if it gets made.
I just ask you a silly question: who do you want to play you? Because God, that would be weird when I see somebody playing me on the screen everywhere. Like,
oh God, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that it's going to be quite difficult for them to do because they'll have to show the younger me and the older me.
Yeah,
because it spans quite a long time. So, I don't know. They have actually the producers and the producers who have it, who are developing it. They're called World Productions, and they've produced one of the biggest dramas here in the UK. It's called Line of Duty.
Yeah,
and I do believe it's been exported over there. So
yeah, it's been on Norwegian streaming services. Yes, yeah.
And that is it's a fantastic program because it might seem far-fetched, but I'm here to emphasize the fact that the level of corruption that they show in Line of Duty is not an exaggeration. This is the problem we genuinely have as a result of drug policy. So I'm pleased that World Productions have got are in control of our project as well, and hopefully it'll get made.
I really hope so. I would love to see it. I met you and see you somebody playing you would be a little bit strange.
They have suggested names to me actually of people they want to do it. So, and that's weird. That's a weird conversation to have. I have to tell you.
Oh yeah, I
really is.
You don't want to say anybody think about those names?
Oh, I can't. I know I can't really because it's in development and those conversations are actually being had. So I can't say that publicly, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Well, we can be talking for hours because I love talking with you, and I've been a big fan of your course, and so on and so on. But we have to put it in the end there because it's an election year. As I said, 2021 going to be maybe a new government, but also new kinds of how we think justice politics in Norway. So what do you have to say to the politicians and the police in this country? Like end speech here?
I would say that any policymaker and police officer has a duty to the truth and has a duty to follow evidence in everything that they do. And it's time for police and policymakers to be honest and face up to the fact that they are not telling the truth. Wherever the police claimed success from a big drug seizure or a series of arrests, those police know that they have not reduced crime by that activity. It's time to face up to that. The police have evidence for that in their own intelligence databases. And, you know, I would love to get to Norway again before the election, if the pandemic eases and there's a possibility to do so, because I would love to debate any politician who claims different evidence, because, you know, the evidence is in favour, is on our side. So I would love to get there again if possible.
Well, we're going to see what we can do. We're going to see what you can do. I'm so glad to have you on, Neil. And I want to plug the book again. You can go adlibris.no, folkens. Der har de både Drug Wars, og de har Good Cop, Bad War. Drug Wars til 87 kroner, andre boken 103. Det betyr 2 gode bøker for under 200 kroner. I was just plugging a book in Norwegian. But so nice to have you on, Neil.
Yeah, it's always good talking with you, mate. I do hope I can get over there and share a pint with you and catch up soon.
You will. Dette her var JointPod, podcast nummer 7. Vi hadde Neil Woods. Og spred og lik og del denne podcasten til flest mulig, folkens. Så snakkes vi neste gang.